Um, Before I go on to the points there, I want to just mention a few books that I read when I was new in the Lord. I just come to the Lord, and the first book I bought, which was a big one, unfortunately I bought the wrong one. They delivered a small one today, but it's normally this big. It's called Power of a Praying Parent, because I had a child and I wanted to pray for the child. So then I used to use it. It's got lots of prayer points in these. That's a little pocket size one. Then I bought, before I was married again, I was single, I found out that the same woman does Power of a Praying Husband. So what I started to do was pray for my future wife for maybe a few years, actually. So I'd go through it every day and I'd pick out a different prayer and I'd pray for it. And then the prayers were so good, I just got jealous. I thought, wow, nobody's praying for me like this. So I went and bought Power of a Praying Wife and prayed that for myself. Because I thought, yeah, I want some of that for me. So I prayed for myself using this book. And then, well, the rest is history. Recently started reading a book, and there's plenty of these sort of books, but this is quite good. If you've got children, Loving Our Kids on Purpose, just one such book amongst many. It's written by Danny Silk, and there's lots of these sort of books about advice on parenting if you've got children. So today's header is how to identify a potential spouse. Okay, so you're meeting each other in groups, rather like this one, as informally as possible. And it's just some questions you might want to ask yourself. Okay, they are mostly guidelines, except where there's biblical doctrine involved, where something is in the Bible and it's important we follow it. So some of the points are more weighty and some of them are just advisory. Yeah. So because we can't be legalistic and try to fit every single thing that's possible in here. In terms of age, putting that aside, are you mature enough to marry? In other words, it's a serious responsibility. And I love the word responsibility because it's really misused. Responsibility is two words. It's response ability. So to be able to respond, you have to be mature. You have to be able to respond to other people's needs and to the Holy Spirit. So responsibility doesn't mean you have to have a massive mortgage with massive burdens if you're a man or a woman. It means you should be able to respond. Simple, isn't it? So if you're not mature, you're centered on yourself. So you can't respond. You can only take care of your own needs and sometimes only just about. So how are you going to take anyone else on? So first of all, you have to be mature. In 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 20 says, brothers, do not be children in your thinking. Be infants in evil, but in your thinking be mature. Yeah. So that's really important. Another point to consider is, does my potential spouse or myself have a fear of commitment? Okay. This can be due to failed relationships in the past or to the breakdown of their parents' relationship. Yeah. So that can create fear. What's the solution of fear? Well, fear is a demon. It's an evil spirit. That's why Paul called it a spirit of fear. He wasn't being metaphoric. Okay. He's being literal. It's a literal creature that is scared. We label it a spirit of fear. All of them are scared, and they're especially scared of Christians. So if they're around you, they're going to be really, really scared. And if you're sensitive, you're going to pick up their fear. Right? If you pick up their fear, you might think it's yours, and it probably isn't. So a lot of the world has put fear down to an emotion, but Paul didn't say that. Paul said it's a spirit. Right? What God said to Joshua is, be strong and courageous. don't be scared. In other words, ignore these things. So in our natural state, without interference, we probably have a tendency to be courageous. Look at children. They're not scared usually of doing even the most crazy stuff, right? So I just want to encourage you on that. Fear doesn't belong to us. And it doesn't belong to us because God hasn't given us a spirit of fear. That's what Paul said to Timothy. Why are we trying to get hold of fear if it's not something given by God? Blessings are given by God. All these good things are given by God. So why take stuff that isn't? The solution is in James chapter 4, verse 7. Therefore, submit to God. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. Romans 12, verse 2. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. In other words, we're not meant to do things the world's way. The world's way is all steeped in fear. Everything that motivates the world is fear. If you haven't got God, that's going to be at the center. The devil's going to be at the center. And fear will drive you. So a question to ask on a practical level. You get to know somebody, you chat in the group in a safe environment, and you start to get to know them a little bit, right? You think, okay, from the little you know, is this a possible spouse? Can I share my life with them? Are you clashing? If you're clashing straight away, it's not really worth going on much further. It's not normally a good sign if you start with clashing. Yeah? Things should be sweet, at least at the beginning, they should be good. I know we face challenges later, but at least at the beginning, they should be good. Especially important because what you do at the beginning, which is what we discussed last week, is going to create a foundation for the rest of your marriage. So, as I'm writing this course, it's triggering lovely memories for me with my wife. So if there is a problem, or we're a bit stressed out or whatever else, I'm quickly going back in time to the sweet memories that we've got, because we've laid a foundation. So we can always visit those memories and then go, oh yeah, let's go back again now. Let's move forward. You see what I mean? So important, isn't it? Now, after a while, let's say you see each other a few times, do you feel that person is appreciating you or just tolerating you? Are they making polite conversation? Or are they interested? We don't want to go with anyone that makes polite conversation. We want somebody who has genuine interest in us, and we have in them. Yeah? In the presence of that person, does the person bring you peace or joy? Or do they bring confusion into your life? If you're starting to get confused, oh, do they like me? Do they not like me? Is this going to go anywhere? What's this about? You know what God says about that? He says in 1 Corinthians 14, verse 33, for God is not the author of confusion, but of peace. And peace in Hebrew is shalom, which means absolute prosperity in every area of your life. So if it's not bringing you peace, joy, prosperity, love, there has to be love. Even on a basic level, we're supposed to have brother and sisterly love for one another, And the interesting thing is that, and this is something to watch out for, and I'm going to go into it in a minute. Maybe I'll go into it now, but when you're a sister or a brother in the Lord, you normally have or should have God's love in you. So when you meet unbelievers, they're usually going to be really bowled over by you. They're going to be like, wow, this person really loves me. But for you, it's just normal love. So there's a real danger there that you meet unbelievers and they latch onto you. And if you're a believer in Christ, if you're a woman or a man, you're more beautiful than the world. You're more handsome. You've got God's radiance in you. They're going to be drawn to you. Yeah? But be careful, just because they're fascinated by your absolute radiance and beauty and your character and everything else. Even a new believer in the Lord has got Jesus living in them. They're still going to have that glory. And that's very attractive to the opposite gender. But that doesn't mean you should go anywhere with it. You see, it's really important. You should be equally yoked. In 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14, it says, do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness? And what communion has light with darkness? Unequal yoking always ends in divorce or a miserable compromised marriage. We've seen that enough. We've seen both of those. Yeah. The solution is don't compromise. Just do not compromise. It is not worth it, and it will not work, and there are no exceptions. We've never had an exception to this. Yeah. And if you're not founded in Christ, you're going to waver around anyway. You're not going to be committed. So it's really important we don't mix. In terms of you can obviously in your everyday life you might have people at work and whatever. That doesn't mean we don't love them in a Christ-like way, but we have to be on our guard not to allow them to latch on to us and suck off us or sap our energy. A very important question is, do I respect this person? In Ephesians chapter 5 verse 33, nevertheless let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. So it's very important that a woman honors and respects a man, and the man loves his wife. So it doesn't mean that a woman shouldn't love her husband, but women have a natural tendency to love anyway. But there might be a natural tendency not to respect. So Paul's making an effort here to mention that wives need to respect their husbands. And husbands, we can be a bit neglectful, or maybe a lot, and we don't show enough love to our wives. So Paul says, love your wives. Now, on a practical level, we're all sitting here and there's many different nations represented, which is absolutely wonderful. And in the church, it's something that really is enjoyable. Now, the next thing to consider, though, if you're going to be one-on-one with somebody as a spouse, is that cultural difference still going to be okay? Have you got traditions that are going to clash at some point? Even basic things like one person may like really, really hot, spicy food, and one person may like bland food. Okay, so assuming you've kind of looked at somebody, you think, oh, that's nice. You need to find out a bit more about their culture. Can you live with the difference in culture? Is it extreme? Now, it doesn't mean you can't, and many people from different cultures do get together and have good marriages, right? No problem. But you've got to be flexible. So it might be that if you really like bland food, sometimes you're going to have spicy food. If somebody, on a practical level, if somebody likes really cold weather and they like to be out in the ice, and the other one likes the Caribbean, that's pretty hard to live with. Because one person's going to be turning up the temperature in the house, another person's going to be turning it down all the time. You're going to annoy each other. I mean, it's a really simple thing, but you really can annoy each other. And that, just imagine that for all your life. There's a very spiritual side to marriage, and there's a very practical side to marriage. Yeah? So we don't exclude one or the other. We think about these things. But, if you know that God's, speaking to men really here, if you know that God's put that, wife to be in your life, then you can't let too many things hinder you. Do you understand? So I don't want these to become hindrances, but just some practical suggestions. Yeah, some of these. Some of them are not suggestions, as I say. They're biblical and they can't be bent at all in any way. And again, with different culture comes another practical consideration. What if your spouse wants to move country? I mean, we actually know a couple who, one was Portuguese, or half Portuguese and half African. Which country was it in Africa? Can't remember now. Half African, half Portuguese. She married a Jamaican. Yeah. And honestly, they got married. We married them. Had children. And the wife was toing and froing from Jamaica to Europe, to England. And it was so unsettled. Well, England and Portugal. Yeah. Last time I think they went to Portugal, but then they went back to Jamaica.
Yeah, settled there. No.
Eventually they settled in Jamaica. Yeah. It went on for years of this unsettling, living separately, not because they didn't like one another or anything, but because she just couldn't handle the Jamaican culture. And in the end, when she stayed long enough in Europe, she thought, nah, this is no good. I'll prefer Jamaica. So she went back there and they're together now. But, it's a practical consideration, isn't it? Yeah. The other thing is very important thing, and a lot of people get this wrong, and I think probably a lot of women are responsible in this area for this problem. They meet somebody and they like them, but they want to change them. They think, well, they're okay, but there's these slight things here and there that need improving, right? And they don't normally change. Very rare do they change. And that might be a problem for you, but for another woman, it's not a problem. So if you marry somebody with the hope they're going to change, no, don't do it. Okay? You haven't accepted them for who they are. I mean, who we are isn't perfect, but it is who we are. That's it. If you can't accept anyone for who they are when you meet them, don't marry them. It really is bad news, because it usually goes on to manipulation. Lots of manipulation to try to get a person to conform to what you want them to be. And that isn't God's way. Yes, people change, but it's God who changes their hearts. And the best way to bring about change is through praying for them. Hence, the books are good. But bear in mind, even when you pray for people and you see change, if they're walking in the Spirit, they'll take on that new identity. But if they go back into the flesh, they'll go back to the way they were. We're like elastic bands. That's why we're by the Holy Spirit, we're constantly being stretched. Yeah? But the minute He lets go, we twang back to what we are. Just these fleshy, earthen, soulish people, So bear that in mind. Accept each other. Yeah? Don't manipulate. Just a practical thing, family traditions, you might want to look at that as well. Are there things that you clash on? Now, you might not find all this out, but you can ask certain things. Yeah. For example, Annette celebrates the 7 feasts. Yeah, the 7 Jewish feasts. So let's say that she marries a man who just about managed to celebrate Christmas, if we believe in that and stuff. So it's going to be really challenging for her, right? Because she would want a husband that shares what she holds valuable. Do you see what I'm saying? Can you see that could be a problem? So your beliefs are really important to you, and you shouldn't compromise on that. Also, complementary characters. Complementary doesn't mean you have to be exactly the same, all right? But you will have overlapping areas. You need to, because you have to have things in common. But there has to be areas that don't overlap so that you complement each other and fill in each other's weaknesses. And if you have that weakness, don't worry about it, because that's why God gave you that spouse. And spouse, if you're constantly having to fill in that weakness, don't resent it, because they're probably filling some weakness that you've got, you know? So I've got weaknesses and my wife's got weaknesses, and there's certain things I just can't get her to do, and there's certain things she just can't get me to do. That's it. And I won't, and she won't. That's how it is, and we've got to accept that. Yeah, you know, we've got to be really practical. This can be a bit difficult to ask or find out, but you can do it quite casually. Again, it's not really a crucial thing, but some people come from big families. Well, I've got 7 or 8 siblings, they might say, or 6 or 5, and other family might have just 2. So one might have an expectation they're going to have 10 children, and one might have an expectation they're going to have 2. So there's a big difference there, isn't there? So somehow that's got to be reconciled. Now, I was originally of the kind of mentality that, you know, a couple of children are fine for me, until God spoke to me very quickly in a dream when we got married and basically said, no, you can't do that. So he changed my heart. He changed the way I thought about children and the size of the family. Yeah. So I knew I had to let go, take the foot off the brake. And I was 40, so I suppose I had to. I couldn't wait too long for children. Now, a very, very important thing is doctrine. How many people emphasize this point with marriage courses or marriage counseling or anything like that? Doctrine. So this one of these kind of boring Christian words, you know? But doctrine is actually what makes your life what it is. That's right. Yeah? It's not motivational speaking that changes your life. It's doctrine. What you believe in the innermost man is what your life is and becomes. So if you say, for example, I'm kind of being a bit extreme here, but if one spouse believes in the poverty gospel, that to be a good Christian, I've got to be poor. And the other person believes, well, to be a Christian, you should be really rich and blessed in every way. That's going to be a pretty big clash there. That's a serious consideration, isn't it? Now, you might meet in the middle somewhere, but if you are of one of those two extremes, you're going to be compromising. So it's serious. Now, another area, for example, we believe God always wants to heal. But what if you go to a church and you've been raised in a family or whatever, where you believe either God doesn't heal, which is a really bad extreme case, or God sometimes heals? Well, there you're going to have a clash. Because one of your children is sick, or family members sick, or somebody in the church is sick, and one's going to pray half-heartedly, and one's going to pray wholeheartedly. And then there can start to be dissension and disrespect for one another. One might think, well, you're really wacky. Why do people die if God always heals? And the other one would go, well, what's wrong with you? You haven't got much faith. You're not praying for healing. Can you see that? And you can really annoy each other. So doctrine's important. Of course, the fundamental doctrine of the Christian faith is the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. If you haven't got that in place, then you're not even a Christian. Imagine if you go and marry a Jehovah's Witness. Thank God they don't marry outside their religion usually, but if you had the misfortune to marry one, they're not going to believe Jesus is God. That's it. You can't, just because they say they're a Christian, they're not. So doing what most people would consider a really boring thing, like finding out what each other's doctrine might be, is actually really important. One thing I think I would advise, and nowadays it's easier, is if you see somebody you think they're nice, I like them, and you get peace in you, maybe if you're a man, you get more revelation, you can ask friends about them without gossiping. We're not talking about gossiping here. We're talking about research. Yeah. Dare I say you can go on Facebook, get to know who they're hanging out with. What kind of things do they write on Facebook? Is there any Christian content? Is everything about their dog or cat or their last party they went to, or yeah.
Look at their likes.
Look at their likes. Okay.
What books they read. They might have gone through a transition, so it might not be relevant.
Right.
Yeah.
Always look at who they follow. You get a good idea of doctrine by looking at their likes.
Who they follow.
Yeah. So I know it sounds sneaky, but you're going to spend the rest of your life with this person. And employers are doing it now. Wow. They go onto Facebook and they go onto these different places. They spy you out to know what you really like, not what you say at the interview or on the CV. So there's all this opportunity for us. What are their friends like? Okay, are they walking with similar people? Sometimes when they're new Christians, their friends may not be the best people you'd want to hang out with. They might still be people that are hanging on from the past because they might have just come to the Lord. You need to give time for God to deal with them and see if this person forms different relationships in the church. Because if they're going to hang around with the old, unsaved people, and I'm not talking about when they're hanging around with them and reaching out to them. I spent a year reaching out to friends that I used to hang out with. But there came a point where I just said, that's it, I've had enough of them now. I'm not going to bother. They don't want to hear what I've got to say. I just moved on, And I think that's good. You should reach the group that you're with. But I don't think you should spend the rest of your life with them. Amen. You've got to move on. Your fellowship is with brothers and sisters in the church. Your fellowship is not with the lost. You can't walk together. Yeah. This is interesting, particularly if you're a man called to ministry. Okay. Is your wife, because God made Eve as a helper to Adam, is your wife going to complement your ministry? If you're already in ministry, this doesn't apply to everything. It could apply to a business. It could do, but that's not necessarily the case. But particularly if you're in ministry, your wife at least needs to agree with what you're doing, at the very least. And ideally, what she should be doing is coming alongside so that she's working with you in ministry just as we do. Now, we weren't in ministry when we got married, but God already had that in mind. Yeah. So we couldn't evaluate that. But we were speaking to a lady who's a prophetess in Jamaica, and she's single, and she said she wanted a husband that could come and help her in the ministry. I said, you're not going to find one, because your job is to help your husband. And she's very well known. She's radio and everything. She's got a big ministry. So can you imagine how difficult what I said to her would be? Yeah, really a well-known public figure. And I'm saying, nope, you're going to have to get alongside his.
Amen. Yeah, and it would mean she's covering the man, and that's going to bring a curse if the man's not covering the wife.
Right. She's vulnerable.
That's it. You've got a question.
Okay,
Sorry,
go
I
ahead,
have a
Corinne.
question. So, if this is her calling, God has called her to minister. So, I don't understand why should she compromise if she's not able to find a husband to perhaps work together? Maybe someone who has a similar calling and to
Right.
support her and walk.
Well, that would
You
be
know,
the ideal. Again, it's that word support her.
well,
What
not
what
like
you really
support. I
want
mean,
is to see the ministries merge,
yes,
to
that's right.
become one,
Yeah.
not her ministry, his ministry. It's one ministry
Mm.
because the two become one flesh.
Mhm.
You see,
Mm.
two become one flesh. So she should be looking for a man who's got an even higher calling than her, who's more stronger in the Lord than she is, so she can come under his covering and flourish.
Amen.
Yes, like Joyce Meyer. She.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know
Just an
about her.
example. I'm just
Yeah.
saying. Some women have a higher calling, and their husband. Or do you? Are you saying that this is not, in accordance
Well,
with?
if he's covering her and he's a man of God who's covering her and she looks up to him as a person with greater wisdom and authority because he's the man, he's in authority, then she's okay. Obviously, if she's dominating over her husband, that's not going to work.
Different thing. Yeah.
It's not
Yeah,
practical.
of course.
Even on the outs, if it, on the outside, if it looks like it's working, it's not really working. So I think it's all to do with how you see your husband. It goes back to wives respect your husband. So if you are this great person and you're not going to respect your husband because he's a pipsqueak, I mean, that's not going to work, is it? You know, using common terms there.
And is
So,
it from God?
well,
Is
exactly.
it God's going against his own words? He said the husband's to cover the wife. So
Yeah.
you have to question who
Yeah.
has put her in position.
When you're with a person, do you feel drained or energized? Very simple terms. Drained or energized. Hopefully, when we get together as believers, as a group or individually, as brothers or sisters together, we should feel energized. We should go out feeling, yeah, I've come out. You know, even if you're ministering to somebody, you still get energized because God provides you what you need to do the ministry.
Yeah.
There are some extreme cases where you're ministering and you're getting a bit drained and you've got to stop. That's different. But in a group setting, which is a social setting, you should feel energized. You shouldn't feel like sapped, you know? So I think that's really important. If you feel anyone putting pressure on you to make something happen, it's not a good sign. So if a man's putting pressure on a woman, that's not good. I'm going to mention it now. I'm going to probably mention it again in the course, but I'm going to mention it now. If somebody says, and it can usually be men that do this, but it can be women, God has told me that you're going to marry me or I'm going to marry you. I call that witchcraft. I don't call that a prophetic word. If God's given you a prophetic word, shut up and keep it to yourself. Right? If you really do have a word, just keep it to yourself. Let the person choose you back. Don't coerce them and put fear on them or manipulation or anything like that. Give them the scope to say no. God never forces us. You know, I've heard people say that, and they've had egg on their face and they've looked pretty stupid because the other person said no. You know, no, sorry. I would say, yeah, I don't care if what you think God has said to you. It requires two people to agree. So I don't think any of you would do that, but you might meet somebody that does.
No, it just reminded me of one story back home. There was a couple, and a guy told the woman that God told me that I'm going to marry you. And then she told him, I'm not sure what my husband's going to say about it.
Thank you. It's really important that we love the person. We don't just feel sorry for them. And sometimes, especially, women have got a lot of compassion and care. And they might meet somebody who's a bit like not quite there, and well, I can nurture him and fix him up and love him and this and that and whatever. You know, just point them back to their mum. If they haven't got one, then just let them hang out with a very much older woman for that kind of nurture and care in the church. Not a potential wife. Yeah, you're not there as a nurse or hospital attendee. I'm not talking about physically. I'm talking about a person mentally, who's needs a lot of care. You're a wife. You need him to minister to you. Yeah, you're not there to prop up a man. You're not there to prop up gambling habits or loser attitudes or whatever. And sometimes things go wrong in life. That's why you should marry for better, for worse. Things might be okay at the beginning, and sometimes something happens to a man, and you've got to be there for him. I'm not talking about that. Okay, I'm just talking about where you meet somebody who you want to be maternal over. All right, just keep that for your children. Yeah, not for your husband.
What about the opposite way round, like knight in shining
armor? Oh, yeah.
Saviour.
That could be the opposite, yeah. Knight in shining armor. You meet a woman who's just absolute mess, and you think, I can fix her up, and I can do this, and no, you can't. Only God can. So, and it doesn't mean there isn't an element of that in a man that we do want to exercise. But I don't think a person should be a complete wreck when you meet them. I think they should have made some effort in their walk to build themselves up to a place where they are suitable to be a spouse. You want somebody ready-ish or ready. Not somebody who's in the making. No unbelievers, Absolute no. If I have to say it every week, I'll say it every week. No unbelievers. Okay. So, on a another level, are they selfless or selfish or critical? Yeah. So imagine you marry somebody selfish, and that's going to be hell, isn't it? I mean, that's just a terrible life. Somebody who only thinks about themselves, and all you have to do is cater to them all the time. That's it. And there are people like that. Yeah, hopefully not in the church, but there could be. Or they could be in the church, but they're phonies. So the making of a real husband is selflessness. And he's there to serve his wife, to nurture his wife, to grow his wife, so that he can present her glorious. That's the purpose of a man in marriage. And to serve his family. So you're a servant leader. And on the last note, it's a really simple one. Do you find them attractive? You're going to have to look at that person's face for the rest of your life. Do they look nice to you? Does he look handsome to you? Does she look beautiful to you? It doesn't matter what they look like to anyone else. That's not important. It's what that person looks like to you. Do you think that they're the loveliest person? I mean, some people put less importance to that. That's fine. Yeah. Because what we don't want to do is just marry a supermodel because they look nice or whatever, whether they're male or female. But, I think you should find them attractive. Their character should be attractive to you. Their appearance should be attractive. Their build should be compatible to you. Somebody asked me a question once, and she said, she asked me a question where, like, would I marry somebody of a different culture or nationality or whatever? I said, for me, my answer to that was that I love myself and I love the way I look. I'm happy with who I am. So I like somebody who's made in my image. And I'm not talking about narcissistically. You see, God made us in his image and in his likeness. So when you have a spouse, you might like them to be like you. And in fact, sometimes you find you see couples going around and they look like brother and sister. You think, oh, they're brother. No, they're married. You see. So, but again, that's a personal choice. That's a personal thing. That was my personal viewpoint. That's not a guide. That's what I liked. I had this like that I wanted a wife that looked Hispanic but was English. That's what I wanted, and God gave me that. So everyone's got a personal taste that they want, and I think it's good to know your taste. I think God wants you to specify your taste, and I'm going to look into that at a future date. Okay, and I think when you're clear in your mind about what you want, God can fulfill it easier than when you're vague. Because somebody might say, well, what do you want your wife to look like? Oh, well, I don't really mind. Well, how tall would you like her to be? Well, that's okay. I don't mind. Now, imagine on a practical level, I'm not talking about God here. Imagine you are fishing and you know a bunch of ladies, you know a bunch of men. And this man is just saying, I don't mind. You're going to go, that doesn't help me because I know 10 women and one of them could be suitable. You see, God matchmakes. God can use people. God can do it directly. With us, he did it directly, but God can use people. Yeah. So you might find that by being vague, God can't work with that, and nor can people. I had a situation where I was trying to decide what car to buy, and I'm really bad with cars, terrible. Really don't know much about them and so on. And I just kept saying, God, tell me what car to go. I need it for my, for the company I work for. I need to buy a car. In the end, he answered me. He said, go and study some cars and learn about their specifications and I'll guide you. He couldn't speak to me because I didn't know anything about them. So I had to study some cars, and at least then he could guide me. And eventually I got to a point where I said to a friend, I'll give you £100 if you can choose a car for me. And God used him and he chose a car for me. And I gave him £100. I mean, it was nothing flash. It was just a Honda Civic at the time. It was a 2016 model. I would never have thought of buying that car. And it was a dream car. It's fantastic. It was really nice. I would never have thought of it in a million years because I didn't know enough. But he wanted me to show that at least I was interested in being bothered. So, if you're bothered, it's an action. You see, faith without works is dead. So bothering is works. So God can use that to then move you on to the next thing. So that really concludes it for this week, which is good because we don't want to be too late. And it's freestyle open question time or discussion.
Just thinking back on what you said about the husband being the covering of the wife, so they need to be for them to be in ministry. What if they were both unsaved when they marry, and but the wife then feels she's had a call from the Lord in a certain ministry, but the husband is not really showing any great strength, just happy to be saved, but wants to take a step back, just wants to happy just being saved but not interested in marriage. What would you propose or say that wife should do?
Just carry on as normal. The Bible just tells you to stick with. But
he's not really covering her because you don't understand that he should cover her.
It's a difficult situation.
Or understand that just as I said, happy to be saved, but not really interested in ministry.
Well, I mean, in terms of him covering you, I think that the husband, regardless of his maturity, is still head of the home. So it's a default thing that you are. That's it. So it's not to do with how smart you are, how spiritual you are. It's just a default position. So I think as long as you're respecting your husband, or that person is respecting their husband, regardless of whether he's in ministry or not, you're covered, really.
Yeah, what exactly do you mean when you say
okay?
Covering? This is something I've heard.
Yeah. Good. Thank you for asking that and not taking it for granted like that. Well, covering really is like an umbrella. It's a protection that a husband gives a wife. So his job is to protect, nurture, care for, provide for, and her job is to help him to achieve whatever purpose God has in your life, and to support you in that. So really, a wife is still taking care of herself in a way by taking care of you, because it comes right back to herself. But that's the beautiful thing about serving one another, isn't it? Because as you serve, God serves you anyway. God takes care of our needs as we care for other people's needs. I mean, Paul's a great example of that. Every week, he takes care of people's needs. He works in a food bank. He's caring, nurturing, loving people, serving them. And now once a week he's coming here and being loved and served, and hopefully other things in other ways as well, not just here. But it's as we sow, we reap, you see.
And the sanction for that from God, from the Lord.
There's
the sanction for this covering is from God.
It's just a God-given thing. It doesn't matter whether you're not a Christian, whether you're a Christian. A man is the leader, the head of the household.
I agree, by the way.
Yeah. And his job is to protect the family. That is his job. Children, everything. He provides a covering under God.
I was just thinking about intellectually as well. You get, some people that are extremely clever, and men or women, and then some that aren't so much. So what do you think about that? Whether that would work or not? Like studying, studious.
It could cause problems, but it might not cause problems. It really depends. There can be. If two people are very intellectual, then they might get on fine. But then you've got that problem of not having complementary characters, where one person might fill in the other person's weaknesses.
Yeah.
You see? So it really depends on the individuals, whether that's a problem or not.
Just a quick question. Obviously, I know this whole course talks about marriage, singleness, and relationships. So I don't know if it's going to be in this part or next part, because I don't know what's coming.
Right.
So I was wondering, how do you know if you supposed to get married?
Okay. Yeah, good question.
Because obviously in the Bible talks about it.
Yep.
There are examples.
So being single is a calling. It's a high calling. It's a noble calling. It's not a defect to be single. And the Bible says that if you're not married, you're able to, singularly serve Jesus, who is your husband.